Josh Gross is the Chief Creative Officer of BBDO Chicago. Josh is an elite award-winning creative executive known for building viral culture-shaping campaigns that merge massive scale with the genuine human soul. Having established himself as a powerhouse creative leader during a highly successful decade at Energy BBDO, he was appointed to oversee the newly integrated FCB BBDO Chicago creative team following the Omnicom merger earlier this year. In this role, Josh is tasked with unifying two of Chicago's most historic and distinct agency cultures, focusing on real-time, high-speed creative experimentation to keep major global brands culturally relevant. Josh operates on a unified creative vision to do big things by scale with soul. He rejects the idea that a campaign must choose between data-driven massive reach and emotional depth, pushing his teams to find the golden intersection of both. He's a firm believer that advertising should meet audiences exactly where they are, resulting in boundary-pushing work that completely redefines traditional media formats. Throughout his career, Josh has been the mastermind behind several of the internet's most viral and celebrated campaigns. His portfolio includes Extra Gums for When It's Time, the massive post-pandemic viral hit set to Celine Dion that perfectly captured the world's collective anticipation to returning to normalcy. Change the Refs, the final exam, a harrowing Grand Clio winning custom video game built entirely from real school shooting data to spark organic gun legislation advocacy among Gen Z gamers. The General's Road Test Royale, a custom Fortnite gaming experience designed to help young drivers tackle real-world driving anxiety in a safe and virtual space. And Eminem's Protect the Peanut, a soulful short documentary film highlighting the massive agricultural science investments made to protect climate-vulnerable peanut crops. Josh's work has earned the industry's highest honors, including top prizes at Cannes Lion, DNAD, The One Show, the Clios, and he's an alumnus of the Miami Ad School and based in Chicago, Illinois. Josh, thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate you spending some time with us today and walking us through what you're up to these days.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a big honor.
So, I know I just walked through an extensive tenure and bio, but maybe you could contextualize things for us a little bit. So where'd you grow up? What'd you study? And how'd you get into the advertising business?
Yeah, well, to go all the way back, I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. Found advertising in undergrad. My sophomore year, they told me I had to pick a major. I didn't make it very far down the list. I stopped at advertising. That sounded cool. And, kind of, I had never really thought of a creative profession as a way to make a living. I thought I was going to have to tuck my shirt in and wear khakis for the rest of my life, doing like businessy things. And took my first creative class, and I was like, oh, this would, I think, be really fun. And then sort of started the journey of like trying to find a job, thinking about going to portfolio school, not having the money, borrowing the money, went to Miami Ad School, and it sort of all kind of started from there. So Miami Ad School was me sort of, I thought I was like, I'm done with the Midwest. It's been nice, but on to other places around the world, and did an internship in Germany at Unifying, spent some time in New York, ended up really getting my career started in San Francisco, ended up at Crispin in Colorado, and kind of didn't realize the Midwest was maybe pulling me back, going from the West Coast to Colorado and then Chicago. So, and then 1 year turns into 12 years pretty quick, and here we are.
I love it. I remember visiting that Crispin office, with the the Sherpa and like the phone that you could pick up and like call, Domino's anytime you want, and like all the plywood offices and stuff like that. I remember somebody told me a story that, when they would do recruiting at that office, you got to fly into Denver airport and drive literally an hour through farmland to get to Boulder, Colorado. And when they would recruit from like LA and New York shops, half the executives would turn the car around and head back to the airport because they're like, where am I going? Like, what's going on? But is that a rumor, or did that actually happen?
No, it actually happens, and I was at a very different part of my career because I vividly remember it was the first time I'd kind of been flown out to a place to interview. It was the second agency I worked for, and I just vividly remember feeling very, very special that I was being driven however long through whatever wilderness I was being driven to a hotel where I was upgraded to a suite. I didn't even know that was a thing. They really had it down. It was a really it really like left an impact. Obviously you knew the agency because of its work, its reputation. I had the advantage of knowing some really talented people that were there, but that kind of like sealed the deal for a very much younger version of myself. I did not turn the car around.
I love it. Yeah, when I think about kind of creative culture where like the environment kind of like projects the ethos of the agency, like 72 and Sunny, the CPB office in Boulder, like those are two that definitely stand out in my memory as a guy that got to travel to all these places to, buy these guys lunch and coffee and, corral them all up. Yeah. But so Miami Ad School, are you a proponent of kind of the postgraduate, advertising education system? Like, do you think it's important to for people? Would you advise current graduates that want to get into our industry? Would you say portfolio school is a logical next step, or would you encourage them to get out there and start making things or trying to get their foot in the door at a smaller shop? Like, what would you say? What would you give current aspirational creatives advice as far as how to break into the industry these days?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it was immensely helpful for me. And, I remember sitting there on the first day and someone was up there explaining to all of us that the connections that we made, in our time there were going to lead to jobs and careers and opportunities. And it sounded really nice, but it was amazing how quickly that came true for me. I have to give credit. Sarah Buchholz, who was a classmate of mine, she kind of got me my first two jobs in advertising, and that came from that Miami Ad School connection. My first job at AKQA, my portfolio teacher that last quarter, Edwin Vilo, was a CD at AKQA and also sort of helped out with that. So it's like the network and just the access that you have to, talented working professionals, I think is super beneficial, really helpful. And it really sets the stage so that like when you do finally enter that kind of first job, you feel like you can hit the ground running as much as possible, being in like still a very new situation. All that being said, I've worked with tons of really talented people over the years that have not had that path and have just sort of worked, either just found a way to work themselves into the industry, or, kind of even in some cases fallen into it kind of by happenstance or by luck. And I think one of the beautiful things about this industry is like, there's not a set list of rules that you have to follow to get a job in it or make a great idea. It's kind of choose your own adventure. And so I think it's like, if it's something that's accessible to you that you can do, I'm the first person to say it's a great experience. I think it's very worth it. But on the other hand, if you're someone who has a plan and wants to like find their own way, I think that's a very valid way to do it too. So either way kind of works.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounds like it's almost like getting your MBA, right? It's not just the skill set and the training, it's the network that you're investing in.
Exactly. And it can be very hard to have your parents understand that. And maybe I wasn't even so sure. I was just drinking the Kool-Aid, but yeah, it really, that was the case for me. And I can't say enough good things about that institution.
I love it. All right. So in January, you were handed the keys to a massive creative engine when Omnicom brought the legacy forces of FCB Chicago and BBDO Chicago together under one roof. These are two historic institutions with their own distinct DNA, processes, tribal pride. How do you approach unifying two separate agency cultures into one powerhouse without diluting the unique creative currents that made them so successful in the first place?
Yeah. I think the first thing, it's probably not going to be too mind blowing for anyone watching, but the first thing for me is really to focus on the output of the agency, of the new combined BBDO Chicago, and that's of course the creative product. That's you know, I didn't make this decision early in my career, but I sort of realized looking back that like that's always sort of been, I guess, my ethos is like I'm just gonna focus on the work because that's really what I want to do and hope that everything else kind of falls into place. And I think it really does to kind of oversimplify it. So I think first and foremost, it's about, you know, maybe one of the biggest aspects of those two, like you said, historic sort of agencies coming together is like there is a great ambition and drive to do great creative work. So have really tried to keep that sort of front and center, and kind of be the thing that we focus on most, and then figure out all of the, you know, millions of logistical things and that you kind of have to work out in a merger of this kind of size. I think the other thing that I've sort of learned just in living it for the past 5-6 months or however long it's been is it really is more than just merging two companies. Like I think you have to think about it. You are creating a new thing. Like you know, you have to have an open mind, and of course, you want to take what's working from either side of the equation and try and implement that. Try and, you know, leave by the wayside the stuff that maybe doesn't help or gets in the way of doing the work. But at the end of the day, I think it really is all about like helping people understand we're building a new thing here, and like we need like a new soul, and everyone needs to feel like they have a part to play in that, and that they're very much a part of that. And it's not about we do this thing this way and this thing that way because, you know, historically that's how whatever group of people. It's really about like let's make a new thing because, you know, that's what we're all here to do is make stuff. And you don't often get the chance to put together a new soul for a company. So that's what we're sort of hard at work doing at the moment.
Yeah, that's kind of cool. It's almost like you can break down all the old processes and, like you mentioned, like, you know, hey, this is how we do things because this is always the way that it's been done. But when you're merging two cultures that maybe, you know, all kind of aim for the same output, but maybe have a different way of getting there, then there's an opportunity, especially in the, you know, acceleration of how fast the industry is changing. It's an opportunity to kind of rebuild the scaffolding in a way.
Exactly.
I love it. All right. Chicago has a legendary reputation in advertising, known for grit, storytelling, kind of more Midwest sensibility, if you will, kind of maybe some of the nuances that get lost from the East Coast, West Coast mentality, but also massive consumer brand, CPG, banking, aerospace. How do you think the spirit of the city itself influences the type of work that you want to do at BBDO Chicago, and what do you want to be known for in this new era?
I think a lot of it has to do. Maybe it's the sort of second city kind of thing that you have here. You know, I've been here 12 years now, and I think in the early days, it was maybe more of a chip on my shoulder where it felt like we had something to prove in Chicago. You know, the sort of iconic legacy notwithstanding. But I think like having spent more than a decade here, I do think it's something. It's actually a very positive force that like it just like creates a drive within people, and you kind of you get this sense of pride of like, yeah, you know, like we're not a coastal city. We are kind of smack dab in the middle of the country, and it's a fantastic city. But the ambition is is very global, which is one of the things I love about this market. So, you know, yes, it's Chicago, and we take immense pride in being from here. But it's really like it's this drive to kind of show the coastal cities, the rest of the country, the rest of the world that, like, you know, some of the best work in the world in the industry is coming right here from Chicago. So I think it's a kind of a competitive thing that we use to drive us. And I think there's really a desire to continue to like evolve the legacy of advertising in this city. You know, I think for decades it was known for a certain kind of work, and I think within the last 5 or 10 years that's really started to evolve. And you know, you have ideas like caption with intention coming from here, or you know, the final exam, and just ideas that are embracing technology and innovation, and just like all of the different shapes and forms that advertising is kind of taking in, you know, 2026. So I think it's like, yeah, it's really a drive to, I think what we want to be known for in Chicago is like, it's important to me that like we don't have a house style or be known for one type of work. I think ideally it's kind of like, oh, you're never quite sure what's going to come out of BBDO Chicago next. You know, one year it might be gaming, the next year it might be something else. You mentioned Protect the Peanut. We're helping M&Ms and Mars get out this crazy agricultural product innovation story. So I think like just being known for, you know, ideas that are really smart and strategic and have unexpected execution and kind of transcend any like one particular format, and just kind of live where people are, and kind of like weaves the way the ideas weave their way into the things that people, like real people, actually care about.
Yeah, I love that. You know, I definitely, as someone who's spent most of my career on the biz dev side, on the vendor side specifically, post COVID, you know, return to office, vendors getting back into the rooms, it's felt a lot more open as a market. Like I'm in Chicago at least once a month, meeting with teams, talking about the things that I'm seeing in the market, the clients that I'm working and representing. Where New York, I feel like, you know, I don't know if it's the tri-state thing where people moved farther out and they're not coming into the city as much, but it's like way harder to get meetings in New York than it is in Chicago. There's just an open-mindedness to like being curious, and I think wanting to build new relationships and have that face-to-face human contact again.
I do think we also kind of collaborate different, and I think it's funny. Like Midwest nice is definitely a thing. It's not always especially when you're trying to get work or give feedback. But I do think like we collaborate in a way that's, you know, we don't. It's not just a word we say in Dex because it's the right thing to say or it's a nice sentiment. Like for us, it really is about, in a lot of cases, co-creating the ideas with our clients. Like it's not just like, hey, we're going to go away for a week or a month or whatever it is, and then we're going to come back with a solution, and you know, either you like it or you don't. It's more iterative. It's more day to day. We're that partner that's like, you know, our sleeves are rolled up, the client's sleeves are rolled up, and in a lot of cases, we're really building it together. So I do think that's also, you know, just one of the special things about this part of the country is there's a deepened sense of collaboration, which is, you know, obviously such a central part to this business.
I love that. All right. You've also said that cultural relevance operates on speed. You're driving real-time creative output to help brands move faster. In a large agency structure, especially bringing these two brands together, how do you practically build an environment where teams feel safe enough to experiment, fail quickly, rather getting bogged down by endless corporate layers of approval? How do you move at the speed of culture? How do you identify trends? You know, how do you do that with some of the legacy systems that have been put in place that, you know, just create that inertia by hapstance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, look, we're like any other agency in that we have structures. There is a hierarchy on paper, but I think the trick is in the day-to-day, making that hierarchy feel flat. You know, I think we've spent decades in this industry, with multiple, like you said, layers of approval and processes, and this is how you do the work. And what we've been doing for the last few years is just like really analyzing every step of the creative process. And it's like, is there a faster way to do this? Can we get to those ideas that are less driven by a media plan and more driven by what's happening in culture and what people care about? Like just sort of playing with the system and finding what works and figuring out how you can keep the creative bar insanely high, but like, are there ways to get there faster? Are there ways to get there more culturally forward? And a big part of that is giving teams that sense of autonomy and freedom to like just drive the work, and know that they have the full support of leadership. So I think like, being this sort of like nimbler organization, like I mentioned, that's very good at collaborating with clients. So you can sort of like build this pace and this speed that's required to do ideas that are either reacting to culture or jumping on, whatever the latest trend might be, is really important. And it's not that we still don't really craft and care about every detail of the work. It's just kind of a different pace you get used to working with. But I think like the benefit in terms of the ideas that you're able to put out into the world, they find their way into these avenues that people really care about. No normal person out there is like just dying for the next ad, but they care about things like like entertainment and experiences and whatever the heck is in their feed. So our job becomes, how do we quickly find the right way to weave brands into those interests? And then it's then the person who does not want to see another ad suddenly finds himself interacting and sharing or taking part in an ad. So yeah, I think it's just a different way of approaching it, being okay with a little bit more chaos in the system, but setting the teams up so that they know they can just like find the magic spark and then build it fast and get it out into the world.
I love that. I love that you mentioned, the idea that consumers aren't waiting around for the next ad, but they do love entertainment. They do love experiences, and they do love when they feel like a brand is getting them. They love when a brand is, commenting on culture in a way that's authentic and comes alongside their value system in the world. How do you, when more and more people have the ability to turn off ads, whether it's, SVOD services, ad blockers, spending enormous amount of times in ecosystems like gaming, which are harder to reach people with advertising. How do you think about this idea of entertaining, inspiring, educating versus interruption in the work that you're doing these days?
The thing that I love about it, I think that the thing that always interested me about advertising is, using creativity to solve a problem or having a big challenge that seems insurmountable and being like, no, you know what? I think we can find a way to get over this. And I think in this world where there's increasing numbers of ways for people to avoid all the messaging that we spend so much of our time and hearts and souls building, it really is just, it's a more interesting challenge. And I think the beautiful thing is that maybe not everyone realizes, like, I believe that any brand, I don't care how interesting or potentially not interesting of a category you might be in, any brand can do really interesting, highly entertaining, culturally relevant work. I mean, I've done it on laxatives before. I've done it for candy. Like it's all about like finding that lane, that way into a consumer's life, to that entertainment that they are spending their time looking. If you can find an authentic way where the brand actually has a role to get in there, I think that's really half the battle. So I think for agencies, for creatives, it just makes what we do more interesting, because I think we're spending less and less of our time just filling out media plans or slotting in, here's the execution for this, here's the execution for that, and more time thinking about like, okay, how could we get this car insurance brand into the gaming space, where our audience that we need to grow are spending so much of their time. And you find your way in, and that becomes kind of the fun of trying to reach people in this day and age where the media ecosystem is so fragmented and attention spans are so short. I always try and find the optimistic kind of fun way to look at it. I think like for a long time, maybe the industry bemoaned the loss of 60-second film or 30 or whatever, but it's like, I don't know, what can we do with 6 seconds? Or, what can we do on social? How do you get someone to actually stop scrolling? It's an interesting challenge, and you just have to find ways to get around it.
I love that. All right. Your North Star as a CCO is a beautiful phrase. Do big things by scale with soul. In modern advertising, it's easy to get data driven and scale without heart, or deeply soulful indie project that nobody actually sees. How do you pressure test an idea to ensure that it strikes that perfect balance of reach, but it has that emotional depth?
Well, first thing I have to say, credit to Landy Day, our chief strategy officer, who landed Scale with Soul. I love that phrase. It's our vision. I think it's very true to this new entity that we're building in Chicago. So I've happily adopted Scale with Soul.
You co-opted it?
Yes. But all credit to Landy for those words.
I love it.
But I think, like, to answer your question, I mean, look, sometimes you have the luxury of a brand that has that big media budget, and the sort of mass reach, if you will, is kind of built into the project. And then, it's up to you to bring the emotion, or bring the storytelling, or bring whatever you need to bring to get the people who are going to see it to actually notice it and care about it, and maybe go so far as to share it or something like that. Sometimes you have that. A lot of times, maybe you don't have that luxury. I think that's where things get really interesting, because I think it's more about whatever the budget might be, or whatever the brief might be. It's just having a bigger ambition for the idea to do more than just communicate a message. So I think what's interesting about these ideas that live more on social media, or live more in culture that maybe don't have a big budget, is you can engineer the ideas so that, like, maybe you light up one particular audience, and that sort of can bring in another audience. Or you do something that's not so one-to-one, but consumers are actually able to participate in the idea and co-create with the idea and have a back and forth with the brand. So I think in terms of making sure, I think sometimes you can do the old-fashioned, you've got the scale, you just got to make sure whatever you're putting out into the world has that soul, so that it's going to get noticed. And when you don't have that luxury, I think it's about, how do you find the most soulful, interesting execution you can do, and how can you put it into the world so that it's sort of like built to scale, and for people to participate, and for people to share it, and for it to take off on TikTok or wherever it might be.
All right, let's get into some recent work. So the award-winning work you did on Change the Ref, the final exam, is a playable experience that simulates the horrors of an active school shooting. Can you talk a little bit about the insight, the misconceptions about video games causing violence? But also, this was a super risky idea, putting people into that first-person shooter world of, like, being in a school shooting or something like that. That could have, it's almost like invoking, trauma in a way. But was that the point, was to really get people to look, feel, sit in that, and kind of think about, what that actually could have been like? Be curious on kind of a little bit of the play-by-play on how that insight came together, and what was the reaction from consumers?
Yeah, we had this interesting jumping off point that, for years, more recently politicians, but I think even if you go back, it was just sort of a more broader societal thing where there was all this conversation around violent video games and people making the connection that it turns kids more violent. In recent years, it's become highly politicized and blamed for, the gun violence epidemic in this country. And, there are no studies that show any sort of correlation to it. It becomes this, strange scapegoat in our society. And I'll never forget when Gabe and Zay first showed me the idea. They had this interesting jumping off point. Okay, that's interesting. And then they also had this parallel, in especially with first person shooters in the gaming world. Every year, the gaming franchises are kind of trying to they've got to one up the gore or the violence or the craziness of the levels or the maps or the storyline or whatever it might be. World War II turns into the present day sort of crazy situation. You've got zombie mode, the future, whatever it might be. And then I'll never forget it. They had a slide that said, but no one has ever done the most violent map. And they just had like a blank slide that said the American high school. And it was just like I get goosebumps just thinking about it. So it's like we knew we had this very timely, very relevant, and very powerful notion. And to your point,
it feels almost taboo.
Exactly. It wasn't a good feeling. I mean, it was good because as creative people, it was like, oh my God, we've got something powerful here. But it was also kind of, you felt a little bit sick because the stakes are so high and this is something that's so real. So it kind of became like, can we harness the power of the insight and the approach and to do this in a way where you would, yes, provoke people, but also hopefully have some sort of impact or some sort of change beyond just raising awareness. And that's really where Change the Ref and Manuel and Patricia come into this, because the way we sort of first brought it to them was more of a controlled gaming experience where we would partner with streamers and sort of build this thing that wasn't accessible to the general public. And it would sort of be this shocking thing you would experience watching a streamer. And Manuel and Patricia, to their credit, their first reaction was like, this is amazing. This is powerful. I want every kid in American high schools to be able to play this game, which again, pit of nerves. Like, well, I understand why that would be provocative and interesting, but like, how are we going to do this without screwing it up or offending people or having the opposite impact? And that began a journey of like, okay, well, if we're going to do this, how do we build a game from the ground up that is, that sort of treads the line of like being respectful but being provocative, and how can it do more than just provoke? And that's where we landed on like, what if this game was what if it became an educational tool, and we implemented these 5 bills that have legislation that has existed in different parts of the countries that have had life-saving effects. So this game turned into not a first-person shooter, but kind of the opposite. It was a survival game. And we just were very thoughtful about, we use data from past school shootings to determine how the map would be and what the school would look like, and even down to how the desks were barricaded in certain classrooms, so that it was very lifelike and true to life. But we very purposefully, you never see the shooter. You have to learn the techniques that kids are taught today in school to stay alive, and you have to find these 5 bills and educate yourself about legislation and how it could help save lives and prevent school shootings. And that's how you survive the game. So, it required us to bring on the right partners to bring it to life in the right way, to be very careful about, just honoring anyone who has been remotely involved in any sort of a situation like this, but to build it in a way that we thought would drive the appropriate conversation and hopefully affect some change, which it ultimately did with the introduction of some legislation to bring back a gun violence prevention unit that the Trump administration shut down during their time in office. So yeah, it was a really tricky one, incredibly the most difficult subject matter, but it's a really special thing when you're able to help out an organization as amazing as Change the Ref and help Manuel and Patricia in their mission and kind of put your skill set to use to kind of help hopefully put a little good into the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations for threading the needle on that one. That must have been a wild experience to be, kind of in the play-by-play there. So, all right, a little more lighthearted. Let's talk about M&M's Protect the Peanut short documentary. This is the epitome of scale meeting soul. Mars investing millions over the years to save a climate-threatened crop turned into a beautiful love letter to farmers and science, especially as the peanut remains under attack. I remember when I was growing up, there wasn't even such thing as a peanut allergy, and now you can't even take them to school. So why do you think a short documentary was the right format for a candy brand, and what did that project teach you about the power of brand utility versus a traditional promotion or an ad?
Yeah, it's a really interesting project. M&M's, they had this amazing story of science meets creativity meets sustainability, sort of sitting within their four walls. That we just wanted to kind of help get that story out there because we thought it was so compelling. And in terms of the documentary, the scale of this initiative and the nuance and complexity of the science, a documentary was really the only way we could kind of like actually do it justice and get that across and talk to the many associates that have been involved in this thing that's been going on for a number of years now. So it was really kind of a practical means in the beginning. But the thing that was really interesting about this idea is it truly did start from a complaint on Reddit and people going to Reddit to be like, what the hell is going on with peanut M&Ms? It tastes wrong. Am I the only one? There was a time where 90% of the consumer complaints around product at Mars were coming from peanut M&Ms. It was more than all of the other brands combined. It was insane. So they needed to do something about this. But the fact that it started from, the brand listening to people on Reddit, it can be a scary place for brands. In some ways, I feel like it's still kind of the wild, wild west. So a big thing that we help them with this process too is like, let's go back and find those initial commenters, the people that had a bad experience, and let's have them try these new peanuts. So it added this sort of like kind
it's
of
like a surprise and delight moment.
Exactly, a bit like let's go to Reddit, let's get the redemption this brand deserves, and make sure our fans, people are still passionate about, yes, M&Ms, but peanut M&Ms in particular. Like make sure we sort of redeem ourselves with them, and it kind of took on a life of its own.
I love it. So how do you distribute a documentary, kind of a longer form storytelling piece of film? Obviously, well, you could put a 30-minute documentary in a TrueView ad, and some brands do. And some brands, roadblock their viewers because they say, oh, well, if this person's going to watch this piece of content, they might be open to a longer video as product discovery in a skippable format. But be curious, what's the right way to drive, tune into a longer piece like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing, it's a pretty straightforward. But I think first was like using social media to like hit the fans that would most likely be into a piece like this. But I think another thing that was really helpful, and something we kept in mind as we constructed it, was like not just being a sort of fun story that we can put in front of consumers, but like actually a useful tool in the ongoing work that they still have ahead of them. So this is something that they're using with like key opinion leaders or different regions as they go into to kind of help explain what they're doing. Because another like sort of fascinating aspect of Protect the Peanut is the job's not over. So different parts of the world, the peanut crop is facing different threats. So it might be extreme weather in the U.S., or it might be a specific fungus or disease in another region. Most recently, they've been in Argentina because for whatever reason in the soil in Argentina, you can't grow peanuts. They turn to dust. So they have developed a blueprint where they can naturally breed. It's not genetically modified, but they can naturally breed these specialized peanut varieties so that they can thrive in, it's a different variety in Argentina than the variety that grows in Brazil, than the variety that grows in Georgia. So it's kind of this ongoing thing, so it's not just about getting in front of consumers, but giving them a platform where they can use it to continue to grow the initiative.
Very cool. All right. For the general, you completely bypassed traditional insurance tropes and built out the Road Test Royale custom gaming experience inside of Fortnite to help Gen Z drivers tackle road test anxiety. What did the creative development look like to ensure that a virtual driving course actually felt authentic to the game, that you were adding to the experience rather than trying to insert yourself in a place where maybe gamers don't want brands to be, if they don't feel like they are adding value to the gaming experience? So how did you bring the general into this world of Fortnite, which is a awesome place to be for scale, equal male and female playership, parents playing with their children? Like that was my re-entry to the gaming world. When my daughter started playing Fortnite, I started playing with them, having abandoned gaming, in college. So be curious, how did you identify this from an insight perspective on wanting to go into this world, and how did you tackle that challenge of authenticity?
Yeah, we no surprise, it was obvious, like a big part of our audience was spending time in the gaming world. And it's like, yes, Fortnite, it's an exciting place to be. Let's put the general in Fortnite. Sounds like a cool place to be, but like if you've got to deliver that, there's a bit of anxiety of like, oh my God, how do we do this? And people don't hate us for it. So, like I was kind of saying earlier, it's like any brand can do, I think, great culturally forward work, but you have to find your authentic way in. So we took a step back and we found this, kind of like really interesting insight. The general is, not to get too in the weeds, but like they specialize in non-standard insurance. So it's not just like normal insurance. It's for people that have like, more specific or special needs in the insurance category. So, new drivers is one of those audiences. And we found this interesting insight around, like the new driver's licenses being issued in the US, we're down like 27%. And, there's a variety of factors, but a big part of it with this, younger generation is just like, it's an anxious generation, rightfully so. They've got a lot to be anxious about, but it was in a lot of cases preventing them from getting licenses, or, they've got more options. They can Uber, whatever it is. And if you're the general, that's not the greatest thing. So it was like, well, okay, if they're less worried about, they're so worried that they're not getting their driver's license, they don't want to take the road test, they've got other options. What if we went to the one place where they're not afraid to drive, where those inhibitions kind of disappear, which is the gaming world? So with Fortnite, we were able to do this killer partnership where we were able to sort of create this world. And we just, it sounds very simple. It was a lot of work. We created these 3 road tests that were based off of the actual road tests in cities that have the highest failure rates of driver's licenses. So it was Francisco and I think New York. And then, the experience, it wasn't about smashing up your car or going the fastest. It was about passing the test, driving slowly and yielding at the roundabout or whatever it is, which I think is interesting. But for me, where it got really cool is, the gaming experience is one thing, but the ecosystem around that and how you bring streamers into it, I think that's where it gets really cool. So we partnered with streamers to sort of we had so many more people streamed the experience than played it. It's kind of, I think it was 220,000 hours of people watching other people play the branded experience. So, in effect, we're turning those Twitch streamers into driving instructors and, turning the platform into America's biggest driving school. So it becomes this sort of very interesting, maybe unexpected way to show up in a big crowded space, but in a way that's totally authentic to the brand, and they have a role to play there, so that hopefully no gamers were oh God, what's the general doing in here? But instead we're kind of surprised and delighted by the brand showing up with something fun, unexpected, and actually useful.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that's a unique situation where you're not just trying to win market share, but you're trying to change behavioral conditions in which the actual addressable market is shrinking. So you're addressing the category as a whole, not just trying to win mind share or share of voice in an extremely competitive category, which is the insurance space. So it's addressing this core element of new licensees, like you mentioned, for whatever reason. Just it's also the test gets harder, and it's more. I've heard from kids, it's it's more expensive, it's more work, it's the test is harder, the barriers to entry to get to your license. Some kids are just I'll wait till I'm 21, until it's easy. Yeah. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. All right, looking back at your career as a creative director, 5 or 10 years ago compared to leading this massive new integration at BBDO Chicago, what's the biggest thing that you feel you maybe have had to unlearn from those early days of being a creative as you moved into the creative leadership era of your career? And what is a creative process that you implement to become a better leader for your team?
I think the biggest thing I've had to unlearn over the years is probably just the natural urge to overthink everything. I think it's maybe most pervasive in creatives, where there's just something inside your brain or your heart that tells you need to, I don't know, keep building on it and keep building on an idea. It's not good enough yet. It's not good enough yet.
Sometimes done beats perfect.
Yeah. I think a lot of us maybe came up in the industry and were led to believe that something great can't come fast. So I think just unlearning that notion of being confident in when something's good, it's good, and move the hell on, build it, versus perfect the deck that you're going to show it in round 13. That's probably the biggest thing. And I think as it relates to being in a leadership position, one of the things I'm obsessed with is how can I help instill that confidence in the younger creators faster, sooner, earlier. So you sort of, go from, I'm just going to sort of submit some ideas, cross my fingers, hope they go, to you kind of have more of this mindset of okay, this is the brief. This is an interesting way to solve it. Here's 3 different ways to solve it, or whatever it might be. And you kind of have this confidence and a little bit more of a maker mentality versus just throwing some ideas into the mix. I think we can move more quickly as an agency. We can get to better work faster, and we can just get to that point where we're continuing to put interesting cultural stuff out into the world quickly and at like a rapid pace.
Yeah, just because it's the first idea doesn't mean it's a bad idea.
It might not, and look, and sometimes it is. It's a delicate balance, but at least being open to it so that you can move with confidence and make great stuff, I think, is what it's all about.
I love it. Well, Josh, really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today and talking about the integration and your plans for the future. It sounds like it's a bright and exciting one and a fun time to be working at BBDO Chicago. If folks want to continue to follow along with your thinking, stay in touch, learn more about the agency in general, where do you want to send people to stay in touch?
Find us on LinkedIn, and hopefully you'll just continue to see a bunch of our works in the trades, but also outside in the media normal people are consuming during normal times as well.
I love it. Well, thanks, Josh. Really appreciate your time today. For those of you who are watching, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening, an honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is how we find a bigger audience. So go ahead and hit that 5-star button if you would. And last but not least, if there's a creative out there somewhere, maybe somebody who is trying to break into the world of the advertising industry, finishing up school and trying to make a choice if they should go to portfolio school or maybe just try and get in now and get going, or maybe a brand marketer that you think would be interested in hearing how the wonderful legacy of BBDO Chicago is continuing to evolve and put amazing work out into the world, don't forget to share the show. And with that, Josh, I will wish you a great day. Appreciate it. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.